What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a quick look at Stellar Tactics. Stellar Tactics is actually a CRPG that I have known about for quite some time because it's been in early access for a long time. People have been asking me about it for years, and I'm finally getting around to taking a look at it because after about 10 years in early access, it will be launching in full on March 30th. Now, I am quite busy the next couple of weeks, so I won't have time to fully review it, and yet I knew I wanted to cover it in some capacity just because I thought everything about it was interesting. And like I mentioned, people have been asking me about it for a long time. However, I am bringing you this particular video courtesy of the game's publisher who reached out to offer a key for it, as truth be told it had passed me by that this was releasing into its 1.0 version relatively soon. But ultimately, what is it? Well, the game describes itself as a sci-fi role-playing game, mainly focused on turn-based combat, space exploration, and of course developing your character across a gigantic world. And by gigantic, I mean that there are supposed to be roughly 160,000 solar systems in this game using procedural generation. It does have a main story and everything, and we'll get to all that in just a moment, but basically this game is large and trying to do a lot of things, and that is almost certainly why it took so long to develop, though it is a solo dev as well, as my understanding. All that said, though, let's go ahead and dive into all of this. So when you first fire up a game here, one of the first things you're going to do is input an 8-digit number, which is going to serve as the world seed that the procedural generation uses to make all of those solar systems. You'll also be able to decide whether or not you would like to go through the tutorial on the Dauntless, which also actually acts as the setup for the story. After this, you've got character creation, where we pick the basics, but mainly we'll distribute 7 ability or attribute points into the game's attributes, which I would honestly say for the most part all do exactly what you would expect, mostly mitigating things like your hit chance with various weapons, your HP, the rate at which you skill up certain things, that kind of thing, and then you will utilize your skill points. You'll put 4 of them, ideally, into the weapon you want that character to use, and then the other 4 are split between the yellow and orange skills there, where you can just kind of pick the thing you want to specialize in a little bit. Now, when your character starts leveling up later on, what you're going to do is assign 5 attributes or ability points, but your skills and the like, those level up on their own as you use them, typically across the entire party, but this is where I want to mention the difficulty settings. So this is the type of game that is as difficult or as easy as you would like to make it, because it has a pretty robust set of difficulty options that definitely lean into the modular side of things, allowing you to adjust everything from turning on or off items or ability, friendly fire, damage numbers, just all sorts of stuff in there really. And so if you wanted to experience the story and setup and all that of this game with relative ease, you can do that. Or if you're just looking for a challenge, you can also just ramp it up a bit from there. However, let's then talk a little bit about the Dauntless. So the Dauntless is something that takes place way before the timeline of the actual game begins, or the modern day of it perhaps would be the better way to put it, because there's all sorts of shenanigans around things like cryostasis and whatnot. But the gist of all of this is pretty simple. You see, the reason you are in cryostasis and on the Dauntless to begin with is that humanity has largely been destroyed by a disease known as the phage. This disease basically turns its host into the equivalent of things like zombies, and while some human beings were immune to it and thus survived long enough to try to escape to the stars, it did not completely eradicate the disease either, but after Earth was more or less destroyed, you awake on this ship to find out that somebody's been experimenting with it. And then as events unfold and everything, you eventually have to get out of the Dauntless as well, but it turns out that, even further into various cryostasis and stuff, the phage only mutates farther, and when you wake up again, you find out that it's turned into a bit of a serious problem, because while it used to make mindless husks that just attacked everything they saw, the phage has now, thanks to those mutations, become a disease that actually retains things like intelligence and higher functions, allowing it to spread much more rapidly across the galaxy, if you will. And now your goal at this point is ultimately to track down what they are calling covens, utilizing a method that you hope will eradicate them for good. But In order to do that, you're going to have to do all sorts of stuff like get around, and at the beginning of the game you will have also chosen a starting ship, which is one of 3 choice. However, the total amount of ships in the game is going to be something like 40 that you'll be able to potentially pilot and upgrade, which is important because you're going to be utilizing that ship in ship space combat and everything as well. And that's where stuff starts to get really interesting. Because as you explore all these solar systems, you can do a lot of the usual stuff, scan and mine planets for all sorts of different resources that you can then put to use or just outright sell, that kind of thing. Dominate the galaxy via trade, or get out there and explore and find the remnants of lost civilizations as you track down all of these problems. And you're bound to run into some other people along the way. You can even board their ships and kill them that way, and then strip and sell the ship that you managed to save for a profit if you like. You're even going to pick up some companions to help you as well. They can all be outfitted with all sorts of different gear, as can yourself. There's a lot of different weapon types, that sort of stuff. But obviously, conflict is basically a given across the entirety of that gameplay experience. Now, as mentioned, you can tune the difficulty and everything as you please, because otherwise combat is divided up into 2 sections, ground and space combat. They are a bit different. Space combat is really more about managing things like your shields, etc., trying to, of course, mitigate all the damage incoming to you, and it's a little, I would say, faster paced overall, because the ground combat is a turn-based affair. And a relatively straightforward one at that. You are given action points. You can use those action points to move and attack as you please based on that character's available weaponry and abilities and perks and all that stuff. So as you level up, you can pick up perks and stuff based on your attributes and skills, hoping to specialize your character a bit, so that can certainly help you out. And then there are things like the mods and whatnot you can add to weapons, but in doing all that, you can get a hold of some abilities and things that can diversify some of the basic flow of the combat along the way, give you the ability to do things like, say, throw up barriers or stun enemies, that sort of stuff. Though it is probably worth a mention here and there that the combat system is primarily line of sight based, which means one of your actions is to crouch, which can actually be pretty useful if there are bits of low cover around, because you can crouch behind those and take a much reduced chance to hit because the enemy's line of sight is no longer functioning. But basic asides, there are some more interesting parts to this. Later on, you're going to fight mutants and monsters and things created by the phage itself, as you would probably expect given the nature of the story. However, from what I understand, it's also possible to eventually get your hands on things like psionics, which is another way you can mix up the combat gameplay a bit. But that is really what I would say most of the game comes down to. Exploring and running around while managing your characters, getting stronger, and also trying to track down the end of this mysterious disease that has haunted humanity for a significant chunk of time. And if you happen to find out some other things along the way, like the mysterious ancient civilization that seems to be all over the planets around here, well then so be it. And while I would say that is far from an exhaustive list of everything you can get up to in Stellar Tactics, I do think that will hopefully provide you a sort of baseline to understand what this game is, and why it's doing some things that are especially interesting to me at the very least. And so, while I simply don't have time to play this in the next couple of weeks, I am hoping this is one of those games I can get around to this summer, when, at least as it stands, my schedule is going to be a bit lighter. But for now, I certainly hope you enjoyed what you saw here, and just as a reminder, this game is launching into its full 1.0 release on March 30th, after 10 years in early access by a solo dev. In the meantime, however, certainly feel free to tell me down below how you feel about this particular title, which naturally means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.